Have you ever seen someone get escorted off a first-class flight just because they didn't look the part? What if that same person turned out to be the one holding the key to the airline's future? This is the story of quiet power, silent choices, and the moment a whisper changed everything. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The hallway lights in Beacon Memorial had that yellowish flicker they always did near the end of a long night. Dr. Nia Kendrell walked it like she had 1,000 times before, shoulders just slightly lower than they were 14 hours ago, but steps still steady. Her scrubs were clean but clearly worn, and the dark gray cardigan over them had seen more winters than it probably should have. In her hand, she carried a small, faded blue medical bag with a busted zipper she kept meaning to replace. Inside it were the tools she never traveled without, just in case. Her locker still had an unopened container of food from earlier in the night, the kind one of the younger nurses had left for her, with a sticky note that said, "You always forget to eat. Please don't." She smiled when she saw it, but didn't touch it. There'd been a cardiac arrest at 4 a.m., a psych consult at 5:30. A quiet moment never came. Now as the city outside yawned into morning, Nia sat in the staff lounge facing the mirror. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, then looked at herself. Not to admire or criticize, just to study, like reading a chart. Eyes tired, skin dry. A faint line deeper than it was last month. Still, there was a presence behind her gaze. She looked like someone who had done something that mattered, like someone who had earned her silence. She thought about the OraCare program, months of meetings, revisions, advocating for better care for airline crews. She was flying out this morning to finalize the next phase with Arriva Air. It was supposed to be routine, maybe even relaxing, but nothing ever felt quite that simple. Her mother's voice, tucked somewhere in her chest, rose again. "You gotta be twice as kind, baby, and 3 times as good. That's the only way they'll see you as equal." Nia didn't argue with it anymore. She just lived it. By the time she got to the Atlanta airport, it was busy with the kind of buzz that only mornings bring. Business travelers moving like clockwork, families half asleep, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. She moved through them with practiced ease, slipping unnoticed past the bag drop, through security to her gate. Flight 173, Arriva Air, first class. The ticket wasn't something she would have bought herself. It was part of the consulting contract. A small courtesy, they'd called it. She didn't think about it much. She wasn't in it for perks. She just wanted to get her job done and get some sleep. Standing near the gate, she scrolled through her emails. Nothing urgent, that was rare. As she looked up to check the boarding group status, she saw her. A woman in her late 50s, perfectly ironed uniform. Blonde bob cut sharp and intentional. That kind of posture you only find in people used to control. Loretta Munson. Loretta didn't speak, didn't smile, just walked slowly past, giving Nia one look from head to toe, measuring, assuming, dismissing. Nia had seen that look before, in high school, at med school interviews, in faculty lounges. She felt it before she fully registered it, that little knot tightening in her gut. That wasn't new either. Loretta leaned toward another attendant, whispered something, then tilted her chin slightly in Nia's direction. The other woman glanced over, then quickly looked away. A smirk flickered between them like an inside joke Nia didn't care to hear. The boarding call came through. First class, Group 1. That was her. She stepped forward with her ticket in hand, calm as always. Cardigan buttoned halfway up, hair in a neat bun, badge still clipped to her collar. Dr. Nia Kendrell, Internal Medicine, Beacon Memorial. She noticed an older black man seated nearby glance at her badge, then up at her face. He smiled kindly. "God bless you, Doc," he said, soft like a prayer. She nodded, heartwarming for half a second. Then Loretta stepped in front of her, arms folded, brows lifted, voice flat. "You might be in the wrong line. This is first class." There it was. No questions, no check, just assumption, just that tone, cold and clipped. Nia looked down at her boarding pass, then back at Loretta. She didn't say a word yet, but something in the air had changed. Something quiet, sharp, like the second before lightning cracks. And even though the engine hadn't started yet, Even though the plane was still grounded, something inside Nia told her this flight had already taken off, just not in the direction anyone expected. Nia handed over her boarding pass without a word. Loretta took it with 2 fingers, glanced at it for barely a second, and handed it back like it was some piece of junk mail. I said this is first class. Please step aside. Nia didn't flinch. She held her ground, met Loretta's gaze straight on. There was no heat in her voice, only clarity. This is my seat. I'm a guest of the airline. Medical consultant. Loretta's brows lifted like she was being inconvenienced. Her voice sharpened, each word meant to carry across the gate area. I'm not going to ask again, ma'am. Step aside. You're holding up the line. A few heads turned. People began to look, first with curiosity, then hesitation. Nia could feel it, that shift in the air. It was always subtle but unmistakable. The moment someone in a uniform changed the tone, and the crowd followed their lead. She'd lived that moment before, more times than she cared to count. A memory surfaced, out of nowhere like they always did. She was 12, standing in the middle of a stage in her middle school auditorium. They'd called her up by mistake, the teacher had said. Those scores couldn't have been hers. Maybe there was a mix-up with another student, another girl, someone with a name easier to pronounce. She remembered how it felt when they made her step back down. This felt the same. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her medical bag, the old canvas digging into her palm. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper. Like watching the same ugly scene replay with a new cast and updated lighting, but the script hadn't changed. Ma'am, Loretta said again, louder this time. Security, please. A man in a navy polo from Airport Services stepped forward. His face was unreadable, practiced. Another joined him, radio clipped to his collar. They flanked Nia like she was an unclaimed bag on a terminal bench. She's being uncooperative, Loretta said loud and clear, without even looking at Nia anymore. Nia looked down at her phone, scrolled through her contacts, found the name, Andre V. Arriva. She hovered her thumb over the call button, then stopped. She didn't need to dial. Not yet. This wasn't about causing a scene. That was what they expected. A raised voice, a heated word, a spectacle. Number not today. She stepped back slowly, said nothing. Let them guide her away, past the gate, down the side hallway. A couple of staff members at the desk caught a glimpse of her badge as she passed. Dr. Nia Kendrell, internal medicine. One of them blinked like he recognized it. The other just looked away, eyes trained on the computer like it could protect her from the moment. Nobody moved. Nobody said a thing. But then, right as she disappeared from view, a young woman behind the counter whispered, almost to herself, "Wait, isn't she the doctor from the OraCare program?" Her colleague didn't answer, just glanced at Loretta, then back to the screen. Loretta stood at the gate, smoothing the sleeve of her uniform like she'd just straightened a picture frame. Composed, certain. She turned back toward the boarding crowd with a small, satisfied smile. The kind of smile people wear when they think they've done the right thing, even if it left someone else in pieces. Meanwhile, in the back row of first class, a 10-year-old black boy sat quietly, watching the whole thing unfold. His small hands gripped the armrests. His mother leaned in to say something, then stopped. Words didn't seem right. The boy turned to her, voice soft. Why did they take the doctor away? She didn't answer, just looked out the window, eyes unfocused. Nia caught the boy's eyes as she walked past, just for a second. Not long enough to say anything, not long enough to fix it, but long enough to understand. Long enough to know that this too would leave a mark. She gave him the faintest smile, not of comfort, but of recognition, of quiet solidarity. It was a look that said, I see you, I'm still here. Then she walked on, the sound of her shoes swallowed up by the sterile silence of the terminal. The room was colder than it needed to be. Maybe it was the sterile lighting, or maybe it was just how things felt when someone looked at you like a problem to solve. Nia sat alone in the small security waiting area. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just polite containment, the kind that felt more permanent than any lock. A young security officer entered, early 30s, probably Korean American. He looked at her clipboard, then back at her with careful eyes. "Are you really a doctor?" he asked, trying to sound neutral. Nia didn't flinch. She nodded once. The man hesitated, as if tempted to say more, but instead he just nodded back and left the room. This wasn't new to her. The being doubted. The being measured for flaws first, credentials later. She'd learned that for people like her, proof always had to arrive before respect. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Loretta was tightening the straps on the beverage cart with more force than necessary. One of the junior flight attendants leaned over and whispered, "Are you sure she wasn't on the manifest?" Loretta didn't look up. People like that don't fly first class. Not with a beat-up duffel bag and secondhand scrubs. Just loud enough for the couple in 3A to hear. And they did. The man in 3A, mid-40s, business casual, had his phone already in his hand. He pressed record without saying a word. Across the country, 3 months earlier, a different scene had played out. Nia had been sitting in a glass conference room at Arriva Air headquarters, standing beside a projection screen that read Oricare Wellness Program, Final Phase Review. Andre had been there, flanking her on one side, the VP of HR on the other. They were talking about real changes, mental health access for staff, 24-hour support kiosks for airport teams, mobile health stations for flight crews who never had time to stop. Nia had built the framework from scratch. She remembered pointing to the slide showing a smiling flight attendant at a wellness kiosk. The caption read, "Take care of the ones who take care of the skies." And she'd said, looking around the room, "If we want kindness in the air, we must first take care of the ones who fly." Some of the faces nodded. Others looked at their watches. But the program was approved. And now? The woman she'd built it for had just had her escorted off a flight. Back on the ground, Nia remained still in her chair. She wasn't angry, not in the traditional way, but there was something deep and slow moving in her chest. Not fire, something colder, something heavier. A man seated near gate 42, scrolling his phone between yawns, perked up when he saw a familiar face in a video. The caption read, "They just kicked out the doctor who saved my father because of her clothes." The clip was shaky, but it captured everything. The tone of voice, the posture, the dismissive wave of a hand. It didn't need narration. Within minutes, the clip had been reposted 100 times, then 1,000. Hashtags bloomed like wildflowers. At Arriva's Atlanta office, Andre Voss was sipping his second coffee of the morning when his phone buzzed. "Did you know what happened at Atlanta Gate 42 this morning?" Check Twitter. He opened the link. He didn't get halfway through the video before he stood up. "That woman is Dr. Nia Kendrell," he said, voice rising as he turned to his supervisor. "Our lead medical advisor, the face of our wellness program." The room fell quiet. He pointed at the screen. "Stop that flight, now." Back on the plane, passengers were settling in, phones buzzing with alerts, murmurs rising from row to row. One woman held up her phone for the person next to her to see. A red banner had just appeared from the Arriva app. "We are investigating an incident on board Flight 173. The flight has been delayed until further notice." In the galley, Loretta's hand hovered over the intercom, frozen. The authority she always carried in her voice, suddenly it didn't feel so certain. Nia sat alone, back straight, eyes on the departure screen like it held answers she wasn't really asking for. Her fingers rested calmly on her phone, but her grip on it betrayed something quieter. Tension she hadn't allowed herself to fully feel until now. The message from Andre had just come through. "Don't go anywhere. Trust me." She hadn't replied. Not yet. Around her, the airport hummed like airports always do. Babies crying, keyboards clacking, the occasional overhead call muffled by bad speakers. Life went on, indifferent to what had just happened. She liked that, in a strange way. It reminded her that moments like these didn't get to define everything, but they sure could change something. Her mind turned in circles. Part of her wanted to stand up and make it loud, make it public, make it sting. But something deeper held her down, like roots wrapped around her ribs. "You don't need to raise your voice to be heard," her grandmother used to say. Back on the plane, the air had shifted. You could feel it, even if no one said anything. There's a silence that comes after injustice. The kind where people try to figure out where they stand without having to speak it aloud. A man in his 50s wearing a work badge that read Arriva Engineering stood from his seat in 2B. He walked to the galley where Loretta was fumbling with a tray. "That woman you kicked out," he said, voice low but firm. "She's the reason my team finally got access to therapy last month. She saved my buddy's life. He was close, real close, and she built the system that got him through." Loretta turned, eyes slightly wide. Her mouth opened, ready with something defensive. "She wasn't dressed appropriately," she said too quickly. "It's about protocol." A younger woman, maybe mid-20s, leaned out from row 3A. "Then maybe your protocol needs to change." Loretta blinked. Something in her expression cracked. Just slightly. Like she'd been punched in the stomach but didn't know whether to get angry or sit down. Then came the twist no one expected. From the back of the plane, a man stood. Neatly dressed but unremarkable, like 1,000 other passengers. He stepped forward with quiet confidence and handed a small card to a nervous flight attendant who looked like she'd rather disappear. "Call your supervisor," he said. "I'm from corporate legal, and he nodded toward the jet bridge. "She's our medical lead." The attendant took the card with both hands, eyes wide. Loretta's phone buzzed once, then again, and again. Her face changed. Not the way someone looks when they're about to argue. The way someone looks when they realize the fight is already over. The cabin phone rang, sharp, direct. The pilot answered, eyes narrowing as he listened. Then came the announcement. "This flight has been delayed by order of corporate operations. We'll update you shortly." Outside, Nia stared down at her phone again. Dozens of new notifications had flooded in. News articles, social media mentions, videos. But one comment stopped her cold. "My daughter saw this video. She wants to become a doctor now. She said, I didn't know we could." Nia swallowed hard. Her chest tightened, not from shame, not from anger, but from something purer, something that mattered more than being right. She didn't cry because of what they did to her. She cried because somebody saw the value in her. Finally, this wasn't about her anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Andre's voice came through, breathless. "They want to talk. The board is in session, and the flight's waiting for you." For a moment, she just sat there. Then she stood. Every step toward that gate was heavier than the last, but in a different way now. Not with burden, with meaning. On the plane, Loretta stood near the door, trying to mask the panic in her breathing. She glanced at the empty first-class seat, still unoccupied. The jet bridge door opened. Sunlight poured in from the tarmac, cutting through the cabin, landing on the aisle like a spotlight. A man near the front leaned over to the woman next to him and said under his breath, "Looks like the real first class just arrived." As Nia made her way back toward the gate, the hallway felt longer than it had just an hour before. Not physically longer, but heavier somehow, like the floor knew what she was walking back into. People glanced up from their phones as she passed, some with quiet sympathy, others with uncertainty, and a few with that expression she'd seen too many times, a look that asked, "Is she going to cause trouble now?" She didn't answer any of them. She kept walking. Near the gate, an older black man stood, leaning lightly on a cane. As she passed, he touched her shoulder, just a gentle brush, nothing intrusive, and said softly, "You've come too far to be small now, sweetheart." She didn't stop walking, but those words settled into her like warm coffee in the cold. They didn't sting, they steadied. Back at Arriva headquarters, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom had flipped. Half an hour earlier, it was just another Monday morning. Now it felt like a crisis command center. Andre stood at the head of the table, phone in hand, screencasting video after video of the incident. Headlines flashed, tweets flooded in, and one particular hashtag was now trending across the country. "This video has already hit 2 million views," Andre said, voice tight but focused. "People know who she is now. They know what we did." The room went quiet. One board member leaned forward. "Why hasn't there been a response?" "We're drafting," the CEO cut in. "Number, not a statement. Action." He looked around the table, jaw set. "Ground the flight. Pull the employee. Handle this. Today." Back on Flight 173, the tone inside the cabin was different now. The murmurs were louder, tinged with tension. People were watching their phones more than the safety instructions. When the pilot came over the speaker, every head turned. This flight is delayed due to an onboard personnel review. Please remain seated. We appreciate your patience. Loretta stood at the front of the cabin trying to look composed, but the tight line of her mouth betrayed her. She took out her phone, tapping quickly. One new message. Stand by. You may be relieved of duty pending internal decision. She swallowed hard. The phone trembled just slightly in her hand. She glanced back toward first class, toward the seat she'd once guarded like a fortress. Now it was just empty. Then came the sound of footsteps on the jet bridge. The door opened. Nia stepped in. No one spoke. She didn't scan the crowd, didn't look at Loretta. She walked with quiet assurance, holding out her boarding pass without a word. The gate agent nodded and stepped aside. Nia slid into her seat, the same one she'd been assigned hours earlier. She set her medical bag gently under the seat in front of her, adjusted her cardigan, buckled her seatbelt. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she point fingers. But in that silence, something broke, and something else settled in its place. Power. Quiet, undeniable power. The overhead chime sounded again. A new voice came over the intercom. Not the captain's, but one unfamiliar, calm, professional. Arriva Air would like to sincerely apologize to Dr. Nia Kendrell, our medical advisor and partner in the OraCare program. We are taking immediate action to ensure fairness, dignity, and respect on board all our flights. Thank you for your patience. A hush fell across the cabin, and then Loretta's name was called over the speaker. She blinked slowly, then walked down the aisle, eyes forward. As she passed Nia, she didn't say a word. Nia didn't look up. Words didn't matter much now. A younger flight attendant approached Nia, kneeling slightly to help with her seatbelt, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for showing us what calm power looks like. Nia gave her a nod. Not grand, just real. The engines hadn't started yet, but something else had. The cabin was hushed, like the space between two storms. The apology had been made, the seat reclaimed, but nobody quite knew what to do next. People glanced around, looked toward Nia, then away again, like they were waiting for someone else to say what everyone felt. Then a man 2 rows up stood. He wore a blazer too wrinkled to be intentional, and had the calm rage of a husband who'd seen too much unfairness in the world. If that had happened to my wife, he said loudly, I'd have sued the hell out of this airline. There were murmurs of agreement. A few passengers nodded. Others sat a little straighter. The energy shifted. What began as quiet sympathy was starting to feel like something more dangerous. Collective outrage. Someone else added, she should take them for everything. Loretta stood frozen at the front, hands clasped too tightly in front of her, trying to appear composed. But the color had drained from her face, and her mouth had drawn into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. A flight attendant leaned down to whisper in Nia's ear, would you like to speak to a supervisor directly? Nia paused. She glanced at Loretta. She saw not the woman who dismissed her, but someone hollowed out by the weight of consequence. Someone cornered, someone afraid. Nia unbuckled her belt. I'd like to speak to her, she said softly, nodding toward Loretta. Privately. There was a brief pause as the request traveled. A few passengers leaned in, curious, but no one stopped her. No one dared. The 2 women stepped into the service alcove behind the galley. No cameras, no microphones, just 2 people who needed to be human for a minute. Loretta broke first. I was wrong, she said, voice tight. I judged you. I didn't know who you were. Nia looked at her, measured but not cold. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a person. The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Loretta's eyes shimmered. She blinked hard, tried to speak, then swallowed the rest of her apology. There was nothing else to say. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Nia spoke again. I don't want you fired, she said. That's not what this is about. But I want the airline to require every crew member, every single one, to go through unconscious bias training. Loretta looked up, surprised. Nia wasn't finished. And I want you to attend that training with the junior staff. Sit in their chairs. Learn what they're learning. not as a leader. As a participant, Loretta opened her mouth then closed it. Her hands trembled just enough to be visible. Sometimes, Nia added gently, what hurts more than punishment is being forced to understand. When they returned to the cabin, no announcement was made, but somehow word traveled fast. Within minutes, the corporate office was buzzing again. Andre fielded the update from the legal team, then forwarded it to the board. Dr. Kendrill's request is specific, and she's not asking for media attention. She just wants change, he said. The CEO tapped the table twice. Do it. Implement it system-wide. Start today. Back on the plane, a young flight attendant with soft brown eyes approached Nia quietly. You didn't just change policy, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You change people. Nia gave her a small smile, the kind that held decades of weight behind it. Loretta returned to her seat. This time her shoulders weren't stiff with pride. They were heavy with thought. She didn't meet anyone's gaze. Her eyes stayed low, not from shame but something else. Reflection. The plane was still silent. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence was different now. Not tense, not uncomfortable, respectful. Outside, the plane began to move. Slowly at first, taxiing toward the runway. No fanfare, no announcement, just forward motion. Because something important had already taken off. The plane had begun to move again, slowly at first, as if unsure of what came next. Loretta returned to her seat at the front of the cabin, the one closest to the curtain. No one said a word to her, not her fellow crew, not the passengers, not even the junior flight attendant who handed her a bottle of water without making eye contact. Loretta didn't drink it. She just held it, fingers curled tightly around the plastic like it might anchor her to the moment. Behind her, Nia sat silently, gazing out the window. The sky outside was that soft, in-between gray that usually came before dawn or after rain. The clouds weren't thick enough to block the light, but they diffused it, softened everything. Inside, her reflection in the window came into view, a quiet silhouette, and somewhere inside her, her mother's voice returned, calm, unwavering. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just live in a way they can't ignore. Nia took a slow breath, her hands resting lightly on the armrest. Her face was still, not smug, not cold, just grounded. There was strength in that stillness, the kind that didn't demand the spotlight but reshaped everything it touched. A man from the aisle seat across from her leaned over gently. I hate to ask, he said, eyes sincere, but would you mind a photo? My wife's a nurse. She'd want to know I met you. Nia gave him a soft smile and shook her head. Let the story speak. Not my face. He nodded, respecting the moment. Before sitting back, he scribbled something on a small notepad from the seatback pocket and tucked it under her bag. He didn't say what it was. She didn't ask. The plane rolled smoothly toward the runway. Passengers returned to their books, earbuds, idle conversations, though the energy was different now. Not relaxed exactly, but settled. Something had shifted. The cabin was no longer holding its breath. By the time the plane touched down in New York, no one applauded. No one clapped for a safe landing. The silence that followed was something else entirely. It was reverent. Loretta waited until the cabin was nearly empty before standing. She adjusted her jacket, lifted her chin slightly, then walked down the aisle. Not with the confident stride she usually carried, but with deliberate, measured steps. She stopped beside Nia's seat. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her hand rested on the seat back in front of Nia, her eyes not quite meeting hers. Then softly she said, I'll attend that training, not because they told me to, because you showed me why I must. Nia looked up at her, eyes steady. She didn't say you're welcome. She didn't say good. She just nodded, a simple motion that held more weight than any lecture. Loretta moved on, one step at a time. Outside the aircraft, the cool jet bridge air greeted them all. Passengers dispersed into the terminal, each carrying pieces of what they'd witnessed, whether they fully understood it or not. Nia retrieved her small bag from under the seat, slung it over her shoulder, and reached for the folded note the man had left. She didn't open it right away. She waited until she reached the gate. Then, standing still among the moving crowd, she unfolded it. It read, "My daughter was watching. Thank you for showing her how strength really looks." Her chest rose gently as she exhaled. She tucked the note into her coat pocket, stepped into the current of people flowing through the terminal, and kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The announcement echoed behind her from the speakers above. "Welcome to New York City." She didn't turn back. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 2 weeks had passed, but the ripple hadn't faded. Not in the news cycle, not inside the airline, and certainly not inside Loretta. She sat in a training room at Arriva's crew center, wearing the same uniform as always, but without her name tag. Around her were new recruits, young faces still full of eagerness and nerves. No one looked at her sideways. No one whispered. But the absence of judgment made the weight heavier somehow. The screen at the front of the room flickered to life. A video played. It showed the moment Nia had been stopped at the gate. No narration, no commentary, just raw footage. Loretta watched herself, standing tall, arms crossed, eyes cold. She didn't blink. She didn't defend. She just watched. The instructor began. "Today's session is on unconscious bias and how it shapes passenger experience without us ever realizing it." Loretta lowered her gaze. No one told her to. But this time, shame didn't silence her. It opened her up. Meanwhile, at Beacon Memorial, Nia moved through her old routine with quiet grace. Patients came and went. The night shifts returned. The coffee still tasted like burnt hope. But something was different. There was a knock on her office door. 3 med students poked their heads in, unsure if they were interrupting. "Dr. Kendrell, do you have a moment?" She nodded, motioning them in. "We've been talking," one said, nervously adjusting her glasses, "about how hard it is to navigate bias in medicine, especially when you look like us." Another added, "We were wondering if you had any advice." Nia smiled, not just with her mouth, but with that deep part of her that had been waiting for this. "You won't find the answer in textbooks," she said gently, "but you'll write the answers with your life." That week, she launched a new training series, Compassion Under Pressure, a program built to teach young healthcare workers how to stay grounded, even when the system wasn't built for them. Back at Arriva, something else was taking shape. They launched a new initiative called People First, Always. The campaign didn't feature flashy slogans or celebrity endorsements. Instead, it used a quiet image, a black woman in a simple cardigan carrying a worn-out medical bag, walking through an airport terminal with her head held high. There was no name, only a caption. "Dignity doesn't wear a label." Andre forwarded the press release to Nia with a smiley face. She replied, "Let the system change, not me." And that was that. No interviews, no spotlight, just a woman returning to her work and letting the world catch up at its own pace. One rainy afternoon, Nia stopped at a small cafe near the airport for tea. She sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup, watching flights take off one by one. At the table next to her, a young girl with soft brown skin leaned toward her mother and whispered, "That's the lady from the picture, the one who made flying safe for everyone." Nia glanced over, smiling. She leaned in and asked, "Do you want to be a pilot?" The girl nodded with wide eyes. Nia placed a hand gently on her chest, over her heart. "Then you fly with this first," she said. The girl didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. Outside, a plane roared into the sky, wings slicing through low clouds. It wasn't just metal and fuel and engineering. It was hope, taking off quietly, but for good. Sometimes the loudest kind of strength is the kind that never raises its voice. Nia didn't fight with fists or headlines. She stood her ground with dignity and let the truth speak for itself. So here's the question. In a world that often rewards noise, can quiet conviction still lead the way? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories coming, stories that speak softly, but stay with you long after the ending.